Hi, and welcome to the Learning Series. This is a new series that we have launched at the North Dakota State Auditor's Office, and we have launched this as a reimagined audit summit. Some of you may be coming over from the audit summit. You've attended those in the past, and now you decided to attend the Learning Series. So we will not be hosting the audit summit this summer, but this Learning Series will replace it. These sessions will be occurring monthly during the summer through fall months on the second Thursday of the month from 10 to 11 a.m. for the 2025 year. And my name is Perla Corsier. I'm the Training Education Coordinator here at the North Dakota State Auditor's Office. I've been with the office here for almost 2 years in May. And I've worked mainly with local governments and specifically the small governments, so all the entities that receive less than $2 million in annual revenue per year. All right, so jumping right into it. So for this first session, we wanted to cover the changes that we've made to the annual financial review process. Again, this affects all of the districts that receive less than $2 million in annual revenue per year. So during the 2023-2025 legislative session, we passed a bill, the Senate Bill 2180, which increased that audit revenue threshold from $750,000 to $2 million. And one of the reasons for this was to decrease the financial burden on these districts, so that rather than having the expensive audit costs, that they could switch over to the annual financial review form. And so there is one caveat here. While you might be under that 2 million threshold, you might still be spending over $750,000 of federal funds annually, meaning that you would have to get a single audit. And that you'd have to get a single audit, which audits the federal funds, and that would be a financial statement audit. The difference here, if your entity receives over 2 million in annual revenue, then you would just have to get a financial statement audit. If you have any questions about these thresholds or the federal fund thresholds, please reach out to our office. We can help you figure that out. And just a little overview. So the audit has a lot more standards and criteria that we have to adhere to while we review your financials and your books, whereas the review is less formal. There are less standards that we have to adhere to, and there's less overall work that goes into it. So the cost is much less than an audit. So I do encourage you that if you are receiving less than $2 million and spending less than $750,000 of federal funds annually, that you do look into doing it a annual financial review form rather than getting an audit, just to decrease your costs overall. I do want to comment that federal fund threshold will be increasing. So it'll be increasing from $750,000 to $1 million, and that will be for all entities for starting September 31st. If you have a fiscal year ending September 30th, on September 30th, 2025, going forward, that single audit threshold for the federal funds will be increasing to $1 million. And again, I know that's a lot of numbers, it's a lot to take in. So if you do have any questions about it, please contact our office. So jumping right into it, the basic review. This just provides assurance, some limited assurance that all the funds are in order. It doesn't go in as depth as an audit, but it will still give you that assurance that things are in order. And it does look at, an audit risk if maybe there's an extended review that should be done, but that's on a case-to-case basis. Again, that could be if you have a construction project that goes over 500,000 or something crazy like that. That might be something that we might want to look a little bit more into, just to ensure that everything is in order. And so for the basic review, it's a 4-step process. We look at if the book balance equals the bank balance, so that would be your ledger records equaling all of your cash accounts, your checking, savings, and CDs. And then we just look also as well into if we review the accuracy of the numbers, so that what's going on in your bank accounts is also happening in your ledger records, just to ensure that you are recording it properly. And another piece is we look into if the funds are used correctly. As governments, you do use a few different types of funds that do have special restrictions and purposes, and you might receive funds that also have special purposes tied to it, so it might need to go into a special revenue fund or something like that. And then we look at transfers, just making sure that those transfers are being made properly, those between the fund transfers. So diving into the book balance equaling the bank balance, this annual financial review form is all completed on a cash basis. So everything is recognized when it's received or when it's paid out. And then also with that, we look at your reconciling items. So these could be your outstanding deposits or the outstanding checks that you might be receiving, just looking at making sure that those have been recorded properly and ensuring we're not missing anything, just so we do have that accurate fund balance. And then caching investments, making sure that those aren't being recorded on that statement, because technically those are just bank transfers. They don't need to go on the annual financial review for themselves. It's just what your total cash account balance is at the end. And then we just look at your bank accounts, just making sure that, there aren't any mistakes that have been recorded from the bank accounts onto the records. Banks can make mistakes, so we're just trying to tie between the two to figure out what the actual fund balance is and what the true activities have been throughout the year. And jumping into the numbers, so we look at the receipts by line item. So depending on what you received, if you received a large federal grant, we might look into that a little bit. And then we kind of look at the disbursements by category. Now this is going to change a little bit between the old annual financial review form and the new annual financial review form that we have. So we're going to look at those disbursements, and then we're going to look at the negative fund balances. So we don't want to see any negative funds in enterprise funds. That could mean that maybe your district needs to increase the amount that they're charging for the services. This is typically only going to apply in the case of cities. I know that there are some districts that do have enterprise funds. They might be charging, have a service that they're charging a fee for. And then those special revenue funds, those are restricted for special purposes. You want to ensure that you're not overspending out of those accounts, just so you don't maintain that you don't have any negative fund balances. And then capital project funds, you might need extra funding, and we do want to kind of keep an eye on that as well. And then moving into the funds, so ensuring that you're using those funds properly. So your general fund, that's your meat and potatoes of your district. That's all of your operating costs, all of your general tax levies that come in, and then everything that you would pay out. So office supplies, payroll can be paid out of their utilities. Those are just your general operating cost revenue. So that all belongs in the general fund. Now the general fund can be used to pay for pretty much anything, provided that it's legal per North Dakota Century Code. And then into your special revenue funds, these are restricted only to be spent on specific purposes. For cities, a great example of this is the municipal highway funds. That's a receipt that you get from the state treasurer's office, and those are restricted only to be spent on road projects and those bigger projects, not for just general maintenance. And another example, a park district could have this. They could be levying for the recreation fund. The recreation fund. So that's a special revenue fund, and it's only for specific purposes. And then the capital project fund, this is for your big infrastructure projects, like a building or maybe a large piece of equipment that you would buy, and maybe you want to save up money for it, or you've got lots of funds for it and you want to account for those in a separate fund. And then the debt service fund, this is only a fund that you would need to have if you are legally required to have it. So meaning that maybe you have a bond. Typically bonds are required by local governments to go into a debt service fund so that you can track that debt and those payments. And your enterprise funds, these are your business type activities. Again, most commonly we see these within cities, and these are the water, sewer, garbage funds that we see. And there might be a couple of others. I've seen gas lines or stuff like that. Typically, we're not going to see them in other entities. And then custodial fund at the end here, this is a fund that you really they don't belong to your entity. So for example, most commonly you're going to see them in a city, and it's going to be maybe for a park district. Let's say there's a park district that has its own tax levy, so it's its own park board. There's a portion of the state aid that comes from the state treasurer's office that you take in, and a portion of it is supposed to go to a park district. So an example would be it would go into your park district and then it would go out. And the unique thing about custodial funds is that they have to have a zero balance at year end. And so that fund it's what comes in must go out within the same year. And then we just look at making sure that your transfers have been proper. So your debits equal your credits. So that just means that your total transfers in must equal your total transfers out. If you're filling out the annual financial review form and you see that your transfers don't equal, something is wrong there. Maybe you included a bank transfer and that's not supposed to be included in that portion of the annual financial review form. And I want to comment here that your funds do not equal your bank accounts. So you could have a general fund, a couple of special revenue funds, and maybe you have, as a city, this is an example for a city, and maybe you have 3 enterprise funds. So you could have a checking account for all of your enterprise funds, and then a checking account that includes, that's for your general fund, and then all of your special revenue funds. So if you make transfers between those funds, you would record those on the statement. But if you're just making transfers between, let's say, a savings account and a checking account, that is a bank activity alone. So you wouldn't have to include that on your annual financial review form. And then transfers that are allowable, transfers in and out of the general fund are always allowable. There aren't any restrictions on those. For closing accounts, so the only transfers allowed out of special revenue funds, capital project funds, and debt service funds are only to close the account. Transfers out of those types of funds are never allowed. And then with restrictions is the enterprise funds. You can transfer up to 20% of your annual revenue of that year into the general fund or a fund that doesn't have a similar purpose. Now, you can transfer more if, let's say, you have a water project going on, like a water tower, you could transfer more than that 20% of annual revenue out of that fund, provided it agrees with that account, what the account is restricted for. And then again, never allowable are those custodial funds, and that's because at year end it needs to be 0, and what is going into that account is going out at year end. So a part of the changes, the reason why we wanted to have this session today is because we've made some significant changes to the annual financial review form and the process. So in a little bit of an overview, we look at making sure the fund balance equals that bank balance. And then because this is on a cash basis, everything is recognized when it's received or when it's been paid out. So now there's a caveat there. If you do have outstanding items and you paid it in December, you're still going to include that on your form, but you're going just to want to adjust your bank balance so that agrees with your fund balance. And then also on this form, we want you to include your long-term debt just to keep track of, just making sure that the debt payments that are coming out that we see on the review form agree with those debt statements that you have. And then the beginning balance, so if your beginning balance is going to be your ending fund balance from your previous year's approved annual financial review form. So that's going to be your ending balance plus or minus any, so it's your ending balance that equals your bank balance. Your bank balance is all of your cash accounts plus or minus those outstanding deposits or checks. And I do want to comment, because we've increased the revenue threshold, there are quite a few districts that have been switching from audits over to the annual financial review form. If this is the case for your district, your beginning balance is going to be your prior year, fiscal year ending total balance plus those reconciling items. So that would, including those reconciling items, so that would be your outstanding checks or deposits. So moving into it, the new form that we have, I'm so excited about this. This form has been wonderful. It's, in my opinion, very easy to use. I've gotten some great feedback as well from other entities. So we just tried to condense the information down. So the first tab that you're going to see on the annual financial review form is the instructions tab. We've kind of condensed those instructions and kind of simplified it so it's a little bit easier to follow. We don't want you to have to read a book when you're filling it out. It shouldn't take a lot of time to figure out what you need to do with it. So when you do start out, I encourage you to read those instructions tabs. And if you do have questions after reading the instructions tab, give our office a call. We're always here to help and answer and help you figure out how to fill this out. So then jumping down into the first part here, underneath entity information, so you've got the entity name. So a new change that we've made is that all of the district names are going to auto-populate for you. So here's just an example. I started typing AN, and you can see down here in the list, it pulls up a whole long list. So now if you begin typing your district name should pop up and you can auto-populate it into that tab. So we don't end up with any mistakes or errors. One area where we might see this is for fire districts. Fire districts can be named kind of any sort of thing. There's the Rural Fire Protection District or Fire Protection District. So we just want to make sure that we're naming the entity exactly as it has been named. So then jumping down here, then you'll end below the entity name. I've left it blank because this is just an example report. Down below that is the audit period. So that's your fiscal year ending. So if your fiscal year ends on a calendar year, you would enter December 31st. For all the school districts out there, your district's fiscal year ending is typically on June 30th. So you can enter that in where you need to. And then for the year below that, that's just the annual financial review year or the audit year. Even though this isn't an audit, we still go by that. And so for this one, I chose 2023. And then you just enter your address in below. We want to make sure that our records are up to date and accurate. So we'll make sure that that address agrees to what you've listed. And then another cool feature of this is that when you enter your zip code in, it will automatically populate the city and the county for your district. And then down below is just your contact information. Shouldn't be too difficult. So then moving on to the activities page, again, down at the bottom, so this is where you enter in all of your beginning balances. So you enter your fund balances from your prior year's approved annual financial review form. Now, if you are changing over from an audit to an annual financial review, again, you'll take those numbers from your ledger records. And then on the activities page, we look to make sure that those transfers are balancing. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to say it again. So your transfers in must equal your transfers out. If they don't, something's wrong. And then again, if transfers out of enterprise funds must be less than 20% of your annual receipts. And like I mentioned that caveat earlier, that is allowable if it's going to a fund with the same purpose, or if it's a water fund or a sewer fund. And then also we look to make sure that no transfers have been made out of your special revenue funds, except to close the fund if that fund is no longer needed by your district. So moving down, I just want to give you, this is a screenshot of the activities page of the report. So up at the top here, you can see where you can enter all of your fund names. The general fund is hard-coded in, so that can't be changed because every district must have a general fund. And then going along, I used a city as an example because they typically have the most funds. For the smaller districts, like the park districts and the fire districts, it's going to be a lot simpler. Typically, you're only going to have the general fund, and maybe you have one to do more special revenue or a capital project. But again, along the top, you just enter that fund name, and then down below that, you can select the fund type. So the fund type will automatically populate for you, and it'll automatically populate a list that you can choose from for which type of fund that is. So over to the right immediately, you can see the Municipal Highway Fund. That's a special revenue fund. It is named as such. And then moving along, you can see we have debt service, capital project, enterprise fund, and custodial fund listed as well, just as an example. And then all the way over to the right, we have the total funds column. So over on that right side, it adds in all of your line items. So that populates over there. It adds all the categories as well. And then it'll show your transfers. You can see our transfers here of $417 equals on that side. And then there's also a whole line of the transfer section. So you can accurately list all the transfers in and out that you have. And then moving down to the very bottom, you see that dark blue row area, and it shows the fund balance. So that's where you enter in your beginning fund balance, and then it automatically totals over to the right in that total funds column. And then right below, it might be difficult for you to see, it's kind of has that yellow line over the top of it, is the current year activity. That's an automatically populated number that takes your total receipts of that fund and minuses out the total disbursements out of that fund. So you don't have to worry about messing with that line item at all. And then down at the very bottom, we have the ending fund balance per fund, and then the total ending fund balance all the way over to the right. That is a switch. That's a change from the previous form. The previous form, it was all the way over on the left, and now we've switched it over to the right. Now moving into this right here, I wanted just to highlight the special revenue fund there. So I showed that drop down tab where you can choose, and we want to see these funds listed in that order just because it makes it easier for when we're doing the reviewing, and it just ensures that consistency across the board for you guys as well, and that we're seeing those funds listed in that order. So I want to talk about the general fund. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a fund that is used to record all activities that are not associated with special purposes. An example of the receipts that you're going to commonly see for are taxes, maybe licenses. I have a whole list there of the different things that you're going to see. And then as well as disbursements that you're typically going to payroll, maybe rents, maybe you're paying rent for an office building or for equipment. There's also just different things there. And these might not all apply to your district, but it's just an example there for you. So then I've highlighted around the general fund just to show the different types of receipts that you can have. So this is an example for a city, but I just want to talk about the different line items and categories here. So right underneath receipts, you'll have the taxes category. So this is where you're going to put all of the receipts that come from taxes or it's a tax source. So your general property taxes, that's your general mill levy that you receive from the county. And then moving down, city sales tax, that comes from a city. If you're a park district that's receiving it, maybe you're a city that's receiving city sales taxes. And then oil and gas taxes, that's a receipt that comes from the state treasurer's office, typically only received by cities and school districts, and same with that coal taxes line item as well. And highway taxes, that's only a receipt received by cities, and that's restricted for special purposes. And then your special assessments, that's if your city a city or a park district can receive a special assessment, but we do have line items available there for you. And then the all other taxes, this is for those taxes that are an immaterial amount. We tried to make the taxes category to be all inclusive for your larger receipts, those material amounts. So if you receive something like city cigarette tax from the state treasurer's office, that's probably going to be maybe $100 or something. That's not a material amount, so that can be combined into all other taxes. And then moving down into licenses, permits, and fees, this is mainly going to be used by cities. It could be used by different entities as well, but the licenses and permits line item right below there, that's your liquor licenses, your maybe you have zoning permits or something like that. And then down below there, the fees line item, this is for like rental fees. So if your city or your park district has a building that they're renting out, you can use that line item to record those types of receipts. And then moving down into that intergovernmental section, so the grants from federal government, that would be any money that you've received from the federal government would go into that line item. Now, I do want to comment here for the cities. So cities were receiving ARPA funds. In the past, we were having you record those in a special fund. That's technically not. You don't have to record them in a special fund. So now you can record them just in your general fund, just a little added information. It is restricted for it to be spent on specific purposes, but you can account for it in your general fund and just keep track of that appropriation in your general fund. And then grants from state government. This would be any money that you receive from a state agency. If it's not any of those, I know a big one is the state treasurer's office. Like I said, we have those line items for those bigger receipts that you get from the state treasurer's office. This is just going to be for a grant from the state government. Maybe you've got a community development block grant, or maybe it's something from public finance. If it's not a loan, you could use that line item. And then down below it's grants from local governments. This would be all the grants that you receive maybe from the county or maybe a city, maybe a fire district from a city. It's just a grant from a local government. And the state aid distribution, this is a receipt that you would get from the state treasurer's office, and we have a line in there for that as well. And foundation aid, this would be mainly received by school districts, and that's also a receipt from the state treasurer's office. And then moving down to the next category. So over here to the left, we have the service revenue category. So this is going to be for all of the receipts that you have for providing a service. For cities, it's your municipal utilities. So that's water, sewer, garbage, maybe gas, something like that. For park districts, we have a recreational line item. Maybe you have a swimming pool or a golf course and you're charging fees for that. Now, I do want to comment, before we had been separating those out into their own separate funds. Technically, that you do not have to do that. So we want to simplify things, and we don't want to complicate your accounting records. So we want you to just record those in the general fund, because oftentimes those swimming pools or golf courses aren't going to be covering those costs, and you might be paying for them with a transfer from the general fund. So it just makes sense to keep it in the general fund. Then there's no extra need to make transfers between funds and complicate your accounting records. And then this is just any other sorts of service revenue that we haven't listed. Maybe could be used for a soil conservation district for maybe you are planting trees or you have a weed barrier service that you're providing and you're charging a fee with that. That can go into that service revenue other line item. And then moving down to miscellaneous receipts category, interest and dividends, pretty self-explanatory. That's all of the money that you make on those cash accounts that you have. And donations, anything that you receive as a donation into your district. Charitable gaming and fundraising, that would be any money that you make from those types of activities. And then sale of assets, if you sell a piece of equipment or something like that, you can pay for it out of your you can record that there. And then your insurance proceeds, anything you receive from the DERF or just insurance, claims, it could be anything goes into your insurance proceeds. And then bond proceeds, this is if you received a bond. Loan, again, if you receive a loan. And then fines, forfeits, and penalties. Maybe if you're a city, you have a fine or a penalty for someone not paying their water bill. That receipt can go into that line item. And then for all your other miscellaneous receipts, anything that is an immaterial amount really can go in there unless we have a line item provided for it. If there's a line item provided for it, please use it. But if there is not and it's an immaterial amount, please record it in that all other miscellaneous receipts. And if you do have questions about something and you've received some money that is not listed here, then contact our office and we will work. We can make updates to the form as needed. Again, this is a new form, so we're trying it out for now and seeing how it goes. Again, we have done research. We have done research looking at the past audit report. The annual financial review forms, just to keep track of what the most important line items were. So moving down into the disbursement side, so that covers everything. The receipt side covers everything that your district would receive. The disbursement covers everything that they pay out. So starting first, we have the personnel and administration. So this is just kind of your operating category of your district, and payroll and benefits. So you can put all the payroll that's paid out, all of your IRS, the tax payments you have to pay for payroll, and then the benefits are included there, and insurance, what you pay for insurance, and then professional development if you're doing any training or anything like that and you pay to go to a conference or something like that. You can put that in the professional development line item. And then if you're renting a building or equipment, again, there's a line item to recognize that as well. And then almost every district is going to have utilities. You got to pay for the lighting, you got to pay for the phone, maybe Wi-Fi, and that can all be summarized into that utilities line item. And then other operating just includes your office supplies, just like little disbursements here and there, little things that you're paying for. You don't need to record that you paid, $5 for a pack of pens or whatever it might be. So we just really want it summarized. We don't want to see it nickel and dimed out. We really want you to take the information that you have from your accounting records and just condense it into this and put it into a category that will accurately describe it. And then moving down to your capital and infrastructure, this is your going to be like your big equipment purchases. Maybe it could be a fire truck for a fire district, or I know it's a pretty cliche example, but or a big building. So that infrastructure line item that could record a building, you have a big project going on. And then in that infrastructure line item, you can also include any of your engineering payments, your contractor payments, anything like that. And then right down below that is your repairs and maintenance. This is your day-to-day repairs and maintenance. This can also be used for, again, I showed over there, the municipal highway fund for all the repairs that you're making there. And then right down there, we've condensed that category, the debt category, just to have one item, and that's debt payments, because we will know what it is either way, if it's a loan or a bond. And then right down below that is your cost of service revenue. So that's what you're charging to provide a service. So for for cities, that would be your water, sewer, garbage. For park districts, that could be, again, for your golf course, or maybe you're providing some sports, some recreational stuff for them. And then again, that other category can be used by the other districts, so such as soil conservation districts there. And then moving down into the functional category. So this is a change from the previous form. So on the previous form, it kind of looked like we were using the categories as the functions, but now we've changed it to, we just have that functional category. So all of the districts can use all of these different categories now, and hopefully it won't be confusing. So the functional category, so let's say for ambulance districts, so for all of the services that are ambulance like specific or providing those services, that can go there. For culture and recreation, this is like your general like park upkeep or stuff like that can go into your culture and recreation line item. Education would be used by school districts. Economic development typically would be used by cities for any sort of development projects that they're doing. And then fire protection, all of the costs that you have associated with the fire district that don't fit into those categories or line items up above can go into your fire protection. And then police protection, that's typically used just by cities because they provide police protection. And then down at the bottom, we have soil conservation districts as well for all of their services that they provide that they're not charging a fee for. And then your miscellaneous category, this is just kind of the two things that we wanted to catch. So if you have any charitable gaming and fundraising, that would go in. If you have any costs that are incurred with your gaming and fundraising, that would go into that line item, and then a custodial pass through. Again, you'll notice we don't really have in all other miscellaneous receipts marked that way, but it's because we want you to take those line items and just kind of summarize the information from your accounting records and find a line item that will describe it accurately in the report. So we're not seeing a lot of those large miscellaneous disbursements. Now moving into special revenue funds, this is a fund used, these type of funds are used only for funds that are legally restricted for it to be spent for a specific purpose. So this would be North Dakota Century Code, maybe by federal action. If you receive a community, like a development grant or a USDA grant, they might have a specific fund requirements. So you'll want to review those documents, ensuring that you're having the proper funds to account for the money that is received. And then it also could be through board action. Maybe there's a centennial fund for a city that they're going to want to save up for. But those are typically where you're going to see those special revenue funds come in. And the big one for cities is that municipal highway fund, and then for park districts is that recreational facilities fund. And examples of revenue that you might receive in your special revenue fund is city sales tax, highway taxes, legacy funds, and prairie dog funds. And down here, I just talk about the receipts is the categories. The category is determined by the receipt source. So again, if it's like a tax category, you would go to the tax category. And if it's taxes, you go to the tax category and figure out which line item it goes into there. And then again, the disbursements are dependent on the receipt source, what it is for, and it's restricted only to be spent on that specific purpose. So here I just have two funds listed, the municipal highway fund and then a cemetery fund. Here you'll notice that there is an amount listed in the cemetery fund in general property taxes, and that might be confusing, but in North Dakota Century Code, cities can levy for funds to take care of a cemetery and upkeep that. So it is general tax money that's coming in, but because it's in a separate fund, we can differentiate between the two and tell that this is only restricted for the specific purpose. And then moving down to the disbursements, those are pretty typical. You're just going to have repairs and maintenance for those. So really, you're going to see the most activity in your general funds, and then your other funds are just restricted for those. Typically, they have special purposes involved with those, so you're not going to have a lot of line items or stuff like that in those. And they can be summarized into those broader categories. Moving down into the next type is the debt service fund, and this fund is used to only pay for the payment of principal and interest of a district's debt, and this is required only if there is legal criteria defining as that there needs to be a special fund to account for that debt. And you might see this for maybe bonds specifically because those are legally required to have a debt service fund tied to those. You might have things come through with special criteria saying that you need to have it. An example of that could be like a grant saying that you need to have a special revenue fund, and that could be maybe like a community development block grant that says you need to have a debt service fund tied to that. And the disbursements that you're going to see out of that are just the debt payments out of there. And then here I just showed an example of what this could look like. So this is a bond repayment, and it's listed as a debt service fund here. And then I show bond proceeds as the receipt type there. And then here is in that same fund, this is down in the disbursement side, you can see we have the debt payment listed there. Now, moving on to the next The next type of fund are the capital projects funds. These are used to account for dedicated receipts for the construction or purchase of buildings, roads, or equipment. Again, really only those big infrastructure, those infrastructure costs that you have. And your receipts are typically going to be loans, grants, maybe federal funds, maybe state grants. And your disbursements are likely going to be under construction contractor payments and equipment purchases. And again, we have the equipment line item underneath that that infrastructure category, and then we have that infrastructure line item. And again, it's restricted only for that project spending only. And to transfer out of that account, you would only be able to transfer out when that project is no longer needed. That fund is no longer needed for the project. And then I just include an example of a new building. The city is building a new building. Sorry, the city is building a new building, and they have receipts from the state government. And I know that's kind of low, but again, this is just an example. And then here under that capital and infrastructure category, we have those disbursements underneath that infrastructure line item. And then enterprise funds, these are the funds that you'd only use for business type activities, something that you're providing a service and charging a fee because you want to recoup those costs. Again, for cities, you're going to see water, sewer, garbage mainly. There can be others in other districts, but it's just typically not common to see them. But if you do have them, that's fine. We do want this annual financial review form to be a snapshot of your accounting records, basically, and we want to present it that way on the annual financial review form. And then back into this, so your typically receipts are only going to be your service revenue funds, and your disbursements, the category used is going to be your cost of service revenue there. And you could use payroll. Let's say if you want to just show what you're paying for water, what your payroll costs are for your water, sewer, garbage funds, you can include that in the payroll line as well. So those are typically the only two line items that we see used in this. And here I just included examples of what this looks like. Again, this is on the receipt side. So we have the service revenue category here and the municipal utilities all listed underneath those funds there. And this is on the disbursement side. So here I did include a payroll payment out of the water fund, and then that cost of service revenue category, and then all of those disbursements, other disbursements are listed in the municipal utilities line item. And then custodial funds, these are funds that are passed through to another entity. So again, your taxes. It could be from intergovernmental, again, that example of the park district for a city. So they do get a portion of those state aid funds, and you have to pass them down as the city to the park district. So you would need to have a custodial fund for that. And then those disbursements, the line name is going to be called pass through to whatever entity. So it's pass through to entity. And sorry about that. But again, we only have one line item listed there now. And again, that fund must always be zero at year end. What comes in must go out always. So that fund must be a zero at year end. And here I just showed an example. So this is a park, this city has a park that they're passing funds down to, and it's the state aid distribution that they're passing down on the receipt side. And then here the disbursements, you can see that there is a matching disbursement underneath the miscellaneous category as custodial pass-through. Now moving on to the other two new tabs. So that summarizes basically what we have, what has changed in the activities tab and what we want listed there. And now in the cash and investments, so these are two different tabs. I did put them on the same page just to kind of summarize it a little bit. So on your cash and investments, this is all of your checking, savings, money markets, CDs, and other cash accounts are entered in onto this page. And we want to ensure that you're entering in all of those reconciling items. So all of those outstanding deposits and outstanding checks. And then your long-term debt tab, that's going to show the type, the purpose of the debt, the maturity date, the original amount, and what the balance amount is of that debt. And here I'm just going to show an example of the cash and investments tab. So here on the left, we have the account name listed. So we want each account name to have a specific name. And typically it's easy to just list them as the last 4 digits of that account number. So here I've just listed examples of different account numbers. And then over to the right, we want the type listed. So whether it's a checking, savings, or CD or other. And then what the bank name is, and then put that bank statement balance. That's your fiscal year ending balance that you pulled directly from the bank statement and put there. And moving down, I want to touch on the outstanding checks. So we want your outstanding check number listed and the account name. So each account name down there is going to be pulled from this account name section, the account name column up at the very left at the top. So it needs to have a specific, so we know which account to take that outstanding check out of. And then those amounts, and we want them each individually listed out. Previously on the last report, we did have them lumped all together, but now we want them listed out by individual so we can verify that they are truly outstanding checks and truly outstanding items. And then again, that's similarly over on the outstanding deposit side down on the right here. That's your deposit number, your account name, and then that amount. So we can add that in. If it was recorded in your books in December, but maybe it didn't hit the bank until January, you would want your fund balance to equal your bank balance, so you'd need to adjust that bank balance. Now, there we have seen some issues with those outstanding items. We do want to make sure that you're recording those accurately. So if you did write a check in December and it didn't go through the bank until January, you would want to include that as an outstanding item. Now, there are a few different scenarios that I've seen. Maybe it's that you wrote a check and you wrote it December 31st, but maybe you didn't record it on your books. Maybe it hit the bank in December, but you recorded it in January, then you would still be a fund balance discrepancy there between your bank balance. And then there are a number of different scenarios. Now, if you are using checks to make transfers between bank accounts, let's say you need to make a transfer between your savings and your checking, and you wrote that check in December 31st, and you're like, okay, well, I wrote this check as a transfer. It hasn't hit the bank yet. That's not an outstanding item because the effect of writing that check is going to be net zero. So that's not an outstanding item that you would have to include on the report. So really keep an eye, just making sure that what happened in December, what happens in that year is recorded, like what is written and what's supposed to be received is recorded. And if it hasn't hit the bank, make sure that's included so that that bank balance agrees with that fund balance and vice versa. If you have any questions about that, please call our office. We can go more in depth on this as well. So here I just wanted to show what happens if you don't include the account name. So you can see right down here in the outstanding checks that we have the account name and it's empty. So that amount is not tying back to your total outstanding check number up there on that column, the total outstanding checks column. So if that account name is not included to that unique account, it won't pull out of the right account, and it will show you that it will automatically populate that yellow and red category that shows that there's issues between the activities, that they're not balancing, and that there's an issue with outstanding checks. So moving on to the long-term debt tab. So this is where we just want you to list what you have for debt as a district. And again, on the left, the type, your bank institution, the purpose of the debt, just what it was for, just an explanation, and then a maturity date, the original amount, and then what your balance amount is left on that debt. So now that concludes all of the changes that we've made to the annual financial review form. So now tying it all together, your beginning fund balance plus your total receipts minus your total disbursements is your ending fund balance. And then your ending fund balance should equal your total year-ending cash accounts, your checking, savings, CDs, including all of those outstanding items, those checks and outstanding deposits as well. And then making sure that those transfers balance on the fund side of things. Now, we are going to be requesting more documents to be submitted up front with your annual financial review form. So the requested documents for this whole process is your annual financial review form, a copy of all 12 months of your bank statements for all checking accounts. So if you have a calendar year, fiscal year, that's January through December checking accounts. And then a copy of those year-end statements for other cash accounts, for those savings and those CDs and any other cash accounts that don't have transactions going in and out all of the time. We just need to see a year-end statement for those. And then a copy of your year-end debt statement by account or a debt payment schedule, just something that shows the debt, the maturity date, the original amount, and that balance amount. And then also we want to get a trial balance, a profit and loss or statement activities. And that's just a report that summarizes all of your financial activity in that year in a ledger format. So we can go and verify that what you've listed on your annual financial review form agrees with what's listed in your ledger. Now, the next exciting thing that we have also introduced is a financial report. So instead of receiving a PDF copy of your review form that you sent in, you'll be receiving this report instead. And this will include a summary of all of your finances throughout the year, that long-term debt table, and a comments letter. So here on the left, this is the cover page. This is the first thing you will see. The next page is a table of contents that just shows you what we did and what's included in this report. And then on the next page, we have just a basic review summary. It talks about what we did, what we found, and then it also just mentions that any comments on the basic review or extended review will be included on the back of the report, at the back of the report. And then on the right here, this is the new, it's kind of hard to see. I acknowledge that because it's definitely I had to copy it over from Word into here. But this just summarizes all of those account activities. So let's say you had 2 special revenue funds. It's going to combine those special revenue funds and include them on the report. So you're only going to see columns for the fund types that you have. And if you have multiple different fund types like enterprise funds, they're going to be combined together. But that will show the summary of activities throughout the year, and that's what your district will receive at the end of the year. Or sorry, when your review form has been approved and completed, you will receive this report. And then over here on the left, that's your long-term debt table. That's just a snapshot of the long-term debt table from the annual financial review form. It's copied directly over from there into this report. And then here on the right is the comment letter. This is any comments that we have. So the one big change that we've made is that we're not going to be moving amounts around on the annual financial review form. The way you send it in is the way that we're going to review it. We're not going to be changing things and moving things around. We're just going to be making comments that these are suggested changes for now. In the future, we might move them, let's say like 5 years down the road but because the word is just starting to really get out there about highway taxes needing to be separated, we don't want to make unnecessary changes that are going to complicate your accounting records and maybe make changes 2 years back. And then all of a sudden you have your fund balances are off of your annual financial review form to your ledger records because it's a prior year that has been closed and you can't make those changes now to those records. And then here's just the ending page to that, and you'll find this report that you will receive after your review form has been approved and completed. So moving on, just common errors that we receive with these reports are using line items for immaterial amounts for receipts and disbursements. Again, if a line item is listed for an immaterial amount, go ahead and list it. But if it's not and it's immaterial, just find a category that summarizes it well. And then combining different funds with general funds, enterprise fund activities like water, sewer, garbage, those should not be included in the general fund. They should be accounted for separately because the budgeting process is different for those funds. And then counting bank transfers as fund transfers, again, those are not fund activities, those are bank activities alone, and those should be not included on the fund transfer row. And then having inaccurate outstanding items. And this commonly happens. I mean, maybe you wrote a check and it may be December 31st, you checked it, it still hadn't gone through, and then all of a sudden you look like, oh, maybe it did go through and you just missed it. Well, all of a sudden that's not an outstanding item anymore, and that's going to be understating your bank balance to your fund balance. So just really reviewing those reconciling items and making sure that those are accurate when those come into our office. And keeping an eye out for negative ending fund balances. Plans should be made to cover those deficits within those funds, whether it's a transfer or maybe increasing those revenues in the next year. Now, finally, maybe you've gone through all this and you thought, well, where's my reporting status at? Am I current? Am I up to date? So if you are behind on your reports and maybe you have some reports that are overdue, please contact our office. We want to get in contact with you and help you develop a plan to get current. We're not here to, slap your wrist and say, oh, you haven't submitted. No, we want to help you get current. And that's a big part of what I do is talking to you guys and helping you figure out what you need to do to get your annual financial review form submitted. And we will work with your district and your specific situations. Maybe you are a new auditor that just came into the position and the previous auditor wasn't aware that they had to submit these reports, and now you've got maybe 6 years to get caught up on. please contact our office. We'll help you get current. So now I hope you have questions, and submitted questions through the chat box if you do. And if you have a specific situation that maybe you might not want to type into the chat box today, please contact the Office of Good Government. I'm available 5 days a week for answering questions via email or phone. And then also sign up for the next learning series if you haven't. I know a number of you probably already have signed up for the next learning series. The next one is going to be May 8th, again on Thursday from 10 to 11, and it's going to be the legislative updates. So everything that has changed that could affect your districts during this last legislative session. I'm just going to check on the Q&A and see if there's anything that has come through. Okay. All right, I have a question coming through. If we have a capital project fund for a specific purpose and have a bad year, can this fund be transferred to general fund or used other than the capital project? That's pretty specific. I think I'll reach out to you on that. So please shoot me an email. My information will be listed on the next slide, and we'll talk about that later. I will have to check on if it's possible. We have a question if someone wants to get these slides. I will double check. I think we should be able to make them available for you, but I will send those out if you would like them. Okay, and then we have a question about submitting documents for a small volunteer fire department. So no formal accounting software. You only have one. So sufficient documentation for the trial balance, profit and loss, or a statement of activities can even be handwritten, but like a copy of everything that you've written down throughout that year. And if you don't have them, you simply don't have them. It's tough when someone else didn't keep records and maybe you have to go in and recreate them, but something that's been handwritten, or maybe you've kept track of all of those activities in an Excel spreadsheet, a copy of that Excel spreadsheet would be great. And it can also help us see if what you had going on in that year matches what you list in the review form, and then also ties into what you have listed in the bank statements as well. So if you've already submitted for 2024, you do not need to resubmit under the new form. That is no worries about that. We will work with you, and if you did submit it on the old form, we might just copy those numbers onto the new form so you can see what it looks like for the next year. So it's easier for you to resubmit for 2025. So we have a question about the custodial pass-through and what it is. So the custodial pass-through, I'm curious, are you talking about the line item or the fund itself? I got a lot of questions coming through. So I'll just talk about it briefly. So the custodial pass-through, the fund is just meaning that your entity doesn't own those funds. Again, the good example of that is when you have a city and a park district, but your park district levies for its own taxes. So it has its own park board, its own entity, basically. So all the funds that go into that fund must go out to that fund because you're not the owner of those funds and they're not for you to use for purposes of the city. And then that line item, that custodial pass-through line item, is the disbursement line item that you use to send it to account for that amount that gets taken out of that fund at year end. So this report is done through Excel. So you go out to our website and click on the button to get the annual financial review form, and you can fill it out there. And then you can attach it to an email and send it to our office. That's how it's being done currently, and that's how it's worked pretty well for us. Okay. So yes, someone asked if you can get a recording. There will be a recording sent out to everyone that registered for this session today. And the form is due within the next year. So let's say for 2023, if you're looking at submitting 2024, let's say we're still back in 2024. So if you had a December 31st fiscal year ending, your 2023 report would be due within the year 2024. It wouldn't be considered overdue until January 1st, 2025. We do want to encourage you, though, to submit it within the first quarter of 2024 so that everything is still kind of fresh in your head and that we get that information as early as possible so that we can provide the most accurate information about public funds to the citizens and to the people that are, paying in and also receiving the benefits of your districts. I have a question. So, should fuel sales for an airport authority be recorded as an enterprise fund? That's pretty specific. I'd like to know more about it. So, if you could, please send me an email and I will reach out to you after this session so we can talk about that later. So, if anyone else has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. Otherwise, I'm not seeing anything come through. It looks like I've covered them all so far. Alrighty, so that looks like the Q&A has been pretty quiet. So with that, we are hitting the 10:55 mark. I don't want to keep you too long here today. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate having you here today with us to learn about the new annual financial review form that we've launched and also the report, showing you a glimpse into the report that you'll receive after you've submitted your annual financial review and it gets approved. Please do go out to our website and check out all of the new sessions that we'll be having over the summer. There are a lot of exciting ones with a lot of good material as well. I think it'll be valuable to your districts. Again, if you have any questions about this form or the process or just any general government auditing or accounting related questions, please give our office a call. We are here and happy to help you out. And with that, thank you all for attending, and we'll hopefully see you in the next session.